In a northern land, where winters are long and summer is stingy with warmth, there lived a mighty jarl named Hagen. He owned vast lands, countless herds, and a longhouse where oak pillars supported the roof, and the fire in the hearth never went out. Jarl Hagen was stern and valued only one thing: strength. He despised weakness more than poverty. His 11 sons were like a pack of young wolves, tall, tireless, always ready to prove their right to the best share. In the hunt, they knew no miss. At feasts, no fatigue. In battle, no fear. Their father looked at them and saw his own reflection in each. The brothers stuck together, like fingers in a fist, and it seemed there was no family in the northern lands stronger or happier. But Jarl Hagen also had a 12th son, the youngest. His name was Espen. He was lacking in both height and build. Where his brothers clattered their weapons, he was silent. Where they competed in prowess, he looked away. Hunting made him sad, and the clash of swords made him wince as if from a toothache. At feasts, there was no place for him among the warriors, and Espen would go to the kitchen, to the large stove, where he would sit right on the warm stones and gaze into the fire for hours, sifting through the ashes with thoughtful fingers. Espen the ash sifter, his brothers laughed. The ash fool, whispered the servants. He was a quiet shadow in a house of loud voices. His friends became the dancing tongues of flame and the warm ash that held the memory of the past day. His father tried not to look in his direction. This mockery of fate upon a strong lineage seemed too bitter. The time came, and old Jarl Hagen passed on to his ancestors. As soon as the funeral pyre burned out, the 11 brothers gathered in the longhouse for a great council. They divided everything justly, as among equals. To the eldest, the lands to the south. To the second, the herds. To the third, the trading ships. Others received weapons, silver, furs, and the rights to their father's lands. Each received his share, and each was content. When everything was decided, someone remembered. And the ash sifter? The brothers glanced at each other and laughed. What use has he for a sword? He'll cut himself. What use for land? He can't tell barley from oats, said the eldest. Let's leave the fool his warm corner and a bowl of porridge. He's not worth more. And no one objected. So the 11 sons divided all their father's wealth among themselves. And to the 12, they left only what could not be divided, his loneliness and their shared contempt. Espen listened to it all in silence. Not a reproach, not a complaint escaped his lips. He simply rose from his place by the cooling hearth, brushed the ash from his shirt, and understood. There was no longer a corner for him in this house. Indeed, perhaps there never had been. The old cook, the only one who was sometimes kind to him, secretly slipped him a crust of bread. Espen put it in a linen sack, slung it over his shoulder, and walked out the door. He didn't look back. He didn't say goodbye. No one even noticed he was gone. The road led to the capital, to the royal court. There
they say, there is service for everyone. Thus Espen left the home where he was considered a nobody to try to become a somebody in the wide world. His only inheritance was his own kindness, the one that no one in his own home had ever seen. The capital met Espen with noise, crowds, and indifference. At the palace gates, the captain of the guard looked over his patched shirt, his thin shoulders, and burst out laughing. Join the guard? You? Be off, before the wind blows you away.
But the head stableman who was passing by looked at the boy differently. He'll do for shoveling manure. Hey lad, want to work for me? Espen went. He cleaned stalls, carried water, fed the horses oats. The work was hard and dirty, but he did not complain. His hands proved to be nimble, and his voice quiet and gentle. The horses were drawn to him, letting him comb their manes and trustingly resting their muzzles on his shoulder. So, the son of a wealthy jarl, who inherited not a single horse, became a servant to 100 of another's steeds. And in the smell of hay and warm wool, he found his new, humble home. Exactly 1 year passed. One day, the king himself came to the stables to inspect his famous steeds. And he saw the stalls were clean, the harnesses gleamed, and the horses were glossy, and greeted their master with cheerful neighs. "Who tends to my horses so well?" asked the king. The head stableman bowed. I have an assistant, my lord, a quiet lad, never says an extra word, but his hands are golden, and his heart is kind. The horses love him. They brought Espen. He stood before the king, not raising his eyes, in a shirt that smelled of hay. You have worked well, said the king. For your faithful service, I will reward you. Go to my herds and choose any foal for yourself. Whichever one you like is yours. Espen raised his eyes, not believing his ears. It was a great honor, and the first reward in his life, earned with his own hands. Espen bowed low to the king and went to the water meadows where the royal herds grazed. Hundreds of foals frolicked in the sun. Bay, black, dapple gray, each more beautiful than the last. Their coats shone, their legs were strong, their eyes burned with youthful spirit. Any of them would have been a master's pride. But Espen walked past. In the farthest corner of the pasture, by a crooked fence, he saw a foal standing alone, thin, ribs showing. Its coat was matted, its mane full of burrs. Its head was hung low. The other foals did not include it in their games. Espen stopped. He crouched down. He looked into the seemingly dull eyes, and he saw not weakness, patience, not despondency, a hidden fire, and an intelligence you wouldn't find in the carefree beauties. I choose this one, he said calmly. The stable hands burst out laughing. Even the king chuckled. The runt? Well, it's your choice. But Espen already knew.
where everyone saw filth and weakness, he had seen the soul of a future king among horses. To the laughter of the stable hands, Espen led his foal away. He did not take it to the common stable, where it would again become a laughingstock. Behind a far corner of the yard stood an old shed, long forgotten by everyone. It was there that Espen brought his new friend. From that day on, his secret work began.
All the oats he received for his service went to the foal. Every morning, Espen went to a distant spring for clean spring water. Every evening, he combed the tangled mane, cleaned out the burrs, and rubbed its sides until they shone. And he talked to it, quietly, as to a brother he never had. They don't see who you really are, but I see. I know. The foal listened, twitching its ears, and with each day, its eyes burned brighter. Thus, in the silence of the forgotten shed, a great mystery began. A rejected youth undertook to raise a true wonder from a rejected foal. Spring passed, then summer. Autumn was replaced by winter, and winter by a new spring. For a whole year, Espen lived for his foal. He would get up before dawn to bring it, a bundle of the best hay, the kind he chose himself from the distant hayfields. He worked twice as hard as the others to earn an extra measure of oats. In the summer heat, he carried water from a cold stream. In the winter frost, he covered his friend with his own cloak. And at night, he would sit beside it and tell it stories, the very ones he had once heard from the old cook in his father's house. The foal listened and believed. No one in the whole world believed in it. At first, even it didn't believe in itself. But Espen believed for the both of them. And every handful of oats was not just feed, it was a grain of this faith. And from thousands of such grains, day by day, a miracle was slowly born. Exactly 1 year later, Espen threw open the gates of the old shed, and a horse stepped out into the sunlight. The stable hands, who happened to be nearby, froze with their mouths open. Someone dropped a bucket. Someone gasped, as if they had seen a ghost. In place of the scrawny runt stood a giant. Its chest was as broad as a blacksmith's bellows. Its legs as strong as oak columns. Its coat, piebald with large silver dapples, shimmered in the sun like the chainmail of an ancient warrior. Its mane, once matted into clumps, now flowed in a thick wave. But the most important thing was its eyes. They held none of the submission common to ordinary horses. A fire burned in them, bright, almost human, intelligence, pride, a strength waiting for its hour. This was not just a horse. This was a heroic steed from ancient legends. Thus, from filth and oblivion, nurtured by kindness and faith, a horse appeared to the world, worthy not of a simple stable hand, but of the greatest of kings. One evening, Espen, as usual, came to the shed with a bundle of fresh hay. The horse turned its mighty head toward him. Its eyes flashed in the twilight. and suddenly it spoke in a clear human voice, deep and calm. Thank you, Master. Espen froze. The hay slipped from his hands. My name is Grimsborg, the horse continued. I waited many years for someone who could see my true nature beneath a wretched hide. Many passed by. You stopped. You believed in me when the whole world laughed. You nurtured me with your kindness. The horse bowed its head. From now on, your fate is my fate. I will serve you faithfully and truly until my last breath. Espen was silent. His heart was pounding, but somewhere deep in his soul, he was not surprised. He had always known. His friend was special. I am glad, Grimsborg, he said quietly. I am glad it is you. And now, master, get on me, said Grimsborg. It is time for you to learn what I am capable of. Espen leaped onto its back. The horse carried him out into an open field, stopped, and took off. It was not a run. It was a flight. The ground rumbled under its mighty hooves. The wind hit his face, bringing tears to his eyes. Hills flashed by like waves. Grimsborg cleared a wide river in a single leap, barely touching the water. A dense forest rushed past. Not a single branch touched the rider. Espen clung to the mane, and in his chest burned not fear, but elation. He, a simple stable hand, a son disowned by his family, was racing faster than the wind on a horse that had no equal in the whole world. And in that moment, Espen the Ash Sifter, the former Ash Fool, felt like a king for the first time in his life. In those very days, news spread throughout the kingdom. The king had announced a great trial. Heralds trumpeted in every square. Hear ye, all! In the middle of the kingdom stands the glass mountain, as high as a cloud, steep and slippery as ice. At its peak sits the princess, our king's daughter, the fairest in all the world. In her hands, she holds 3 golden apples. The brave man, the heralds boomed, who can ride his horse to the summit 3 times and receive all 3 apples from the princess's hands, shall take her as his wife and receive half the kingdom in addition. Knights from all lands gathered at the foot of the mountain. But just one look at its icy slopes made many turn pale and retreat. The mountain shone in the sun, beautiful and merciless. Hundreds of brave men had already tried to conquer it. Not one had climbed higher than 3 fathoms. The contest lasted for 3 days. Knights gathered from all corners of the world. Princes in gilded armor, warriors on purebred steeds, heroes whose names thundered across all kingdoms. One by one, they charged to assault the mountain, and one by one, they fell. The horses' hooves slipped on the icy surface. The mighty steeds, snorting in terror, slid down, dragging their riders with them. Steel clanged, lances cracked.
Some thought to shoe their horses with sharp spikes, but even the spikes only scraped against the glass, finding no purchase. No one made it even halfway up. The mountain shone, indifferent and unassailable. It seemed to laugh at their strength and steel, and the gleam of expensive armor merely reflected off its icy flanks. At the summit, the princess sat just as lonely, clutching the golden apples. And the king grew gloomier with each passing hour, losing hope. That evening, Espen came to the shed. His eyes were burning. "Did you see Grimsborg? No one can climb the mountain. Not a single one."
The horse nodded slowly. "I saw, and that is why I tell you, our time has come, master." "But how? The best knights of the kingdom are powerless there." "Strength has nothing to do with it," Grimsborg replied. "The glass mountain yields not to steel, but to magic. Listen closely." He lowered his head to Espen's very ear. "Behind the castle stands an old smithy, long abandoned. Beneath the rusty anvil, a copper bridle is hidden. Bring it to me. It will give my hooves power over the slippery glass." The horse shook its mane, and out of nowhere, as if from thin air, a saddle appeared with a bundle tied to it. "And this is copper armor. It was waiting for you, master, waiting for this day." Espen unwrapped the cloth. The armor gleamed dimly in the twilight, holding an ancient power. Thus the horse, born of filth and faith, revealed to its master a secret unknown to the noblest knights of the world. On the 4th day of the contest, a strange rider appeared at the foot of the mountain. Copper armor concealed his face. A mighty piebald horse snorted and pawed the ground. No one recognized the humble stable hand in this knight. Espen did not wait. He struck with his heels, and Grimsborg surged forward. The crowd gasped. The horse's hooves dug into the glass like claws into wood. With a roar and a rumble, he soared up the slope, to where hundreds of others had only slid helplessly down. A third of the way up the mountain, Espen snatched the golden apple from the hands of the stunned princess at a full gallop and vanished before anyone could come to their senses. On the 2nd day, a knight in silver armor appeared. He ascended 2/3 of the way up the mountain and took the 2nd apple. On the 3rd, a knight in gleaming gold reached the very summit. The princess, smiling, handed him the last apple herself, and 3 times the mysterious hero disappeared like the morning mist. 3 knights, copper, silver, and gold, but they had one heart, and it belonged to the youth whom the whole world considered an ash fool. But the joy in the kingdom did not last long. The king was in turmoil. The mysterious knight had vanished, taking with him all 3 apples and the secret of his name. The princess was still without a groom, and from the northern mountains a new trouble was already descending. A 3-headed troll, as ancient as the mountains themselves, and as wicked as a winter storm. He marched through the kingdom,
leaving ashes in his wake. Villages burned. People fled, abandoning all their possessions. Finally, the monster stood before the walls of the capital. The earth trembled beneath its feet. 3 maws opened, and a thunderous voice rolled over the city. "Give me the princess for a wife, or I will level your city with the ground, not leaving one stone upon another." The guards on the walls turned white. The king clutched his head in his hands.
Thus joy turned to terror, and in place of the icy mountain came a living, breathing, raging doom. The king sent out a call throughout the kingdom. "To the one who slays the troll, I will give the princess in marriage, and the crown in addition." But silence was his answer. The very same knights who had so bravely charged the glass mountain were now hiding behind the thick castle walls. It was one thing to ride for the amusement of the crowd. It was quite another to stand face to face with a 3-headed death. No one came forward. Espen watched this from his corner. And in the evening, as always, he went to Grimsborg. "Well, my friend," he said quietly, "it seems it is our time again. We can't let the princess be given to that monster. And I feel sorry for the people." Grimsborg stamped his hoof and shook his mane. "I was waiting for those words, master. Let's ride." At dawn, a rider in copper armor on a mighty piebald horse rode out of an inconspicuous side gate. When all the swords of the kingdom were hidden in their sheaths, the one whom no one even considered a warrior drew his blade. They met on the field at dawn, right by the city walls. The troll roared with all 3 throats and brought a club the size of a ship's mast down on the rider. The earth shuddered, but where the blow landed, there was already no one there. Grimsborg danced around the monster like a flame in the wind. He was faster than thought. A blow from the left. The horse was already on the right. A swing from above. They were already behind the enemy's back. And he didn't just dodge, he struck. His shod hooves slammed into the troll's knees. His teeth tore at the sinewy ankles. The monster roared in pain and fury, losing its balance. In these moments, Espen struck. The sword whistled, and the first head rolled onto the grass. The troll howled. Again the whistle of steel. The second head fell. The monster staggered. Grimsborg reared up on his hind legs. Espen, rising in his stirrups, put all his strength into the blow. The third head separated from the shoulders. The troll collapsed, shaking the ground. It was a battle of 2 hearts against 3 heads. And loyalty proved sharper than a sword, and friendship stronger than any armor. The troll had not yet grown cold, and the city gates were already thrown open. The king, the guards, the courtiers, the princess herself, everyone ran to the battlefield to embrace their savior, to shower him with gold and glory. But the field was empty. Only in the distance, at the edge of the forest, the silhouette of a rider on a mighty piebald horse flickered and dissolved among the trees like the morning mist. "Who is he?" the princess whispered. No one knew. Again,
the mysterious night had given the kingdom salvation. And again he disappeared, without giving his name, without showing his face, without accepting a reward.
The king ordered him to be sought on all roads. The heralds grew hoarse, shouting promises of riches, but the hero seemed to have vanished into thin air. And in a far corner of the castle stables, a quiet stable hand was feeding his horse oats and smiling. His modesty was as great as his courage. Days passed. The mysterious knight did not appear. Then the king summoned all the people to the palace square. His face was grim, his voice trembled. Listen, everyone. Many years ago, a tragedy occurred that I have kept silent about. My best warhorse, the faithful black whirlwind, was stolen. The devil himself dragged him away to his underworld. The crowd gasped. People made the sign of the cross. I am old, the king continued, and I want to know who saved my kingdom. Therefore, I announce the final trial. Whoever descends into hell and brings me back my horse, that is the true hero. To him I will give my daughter and the entire kingdom. Silence was his answer. The knights turned pale and looked away. A mountain or a troll was one thing, but the underworld, the realm of the Lord of Darkness himself, this was not a trial. This was certain doom. Thus the king, despairing of finding the hero on earth, threw down a challenge to hell itself. That same night, Espen went to his horse. Well, Grimsborg, he said quietly, did you hear the king's decree? It seems we'll have to pay a visit to the devil himself. The horse did not flinch. Only its eyes flashed in the darkness. I know the way, master. Hold on tight. They rode for many days, to the farthest north, to where the sun forgets to rise, where the snow is black from the eternal night. At the edge of the world, among dead rocks, a cave gaped. From its throat wafted sulfur and decay. A cold came from it, not of winter, but of the grave, chilling to the bone. The entrance to the underworld. Espen dismounted, peered into the bottomless darkness. Then he got back in the saddle. Well, let's go, friend. And they stepped into the gloom, not as victims going to the slaughter, but as warriors, ready to challenge hell itself. The clatter of Grimsborg's hooves on the stones of the underworld sounded like a war hammer. The path led deeper and deeper until it ran into an obstacle, a river of fire. It roared and churned with molten flame. The heat was so intense that the stones on the banks melted like wax. No bridge, no ford, just a wall of blinding fire from edge to edge. Espen felt his heart sink. This is the end, Grimsborg. We can't get through. Hold on tight, master, the horse answered calmly, and don't close your eyes. He backed up, getting a running start. His muscles tensed like a bowstring, and he leaped straight into the roaring, fiery abyss. The flames closed around them with a triumphant howl. The heat scorched Espen's face, But Grimsborg's coat only glowed and did not catch fire. The magical horse flew through hell like an arrow through water. His hooves struck solid stone. They were on the other side. Grimsborg shook himself off. Only the tip of his tail was smoking slightly. "It's nothing," he snorted. "It'll grow back." The Devil's throne room blazed with a crimson light. The Lord of the Underworld sat on a throne of bones, immense and terrible. Seeing his guests, he burst out laughing. "A mortal? Here? What audacity! What do you want, little bug?" "I've come to take the king's horse," Espen answered calmly. "But first, I want to make sure you are truly as mighty as they say." The devil drew himself up proudly. "They say," Espen continued, "that you can make yourself so small you can fit inside this sack. But I don't believe it. It's impossible." "Impossible?" the devil roared. "Watch." He shrank down and scurried into the sack. In that same instant, Espen pulled the drawstring tight with a strong knot. "Let me out," the sack shrieked. "First, the horse, and your hell steed in addition, for the trouble." Thus the Lord of Darkness, accustomed to catching souls, fell into a simple sack himself, thanks to the cunning of one he did not even consider an opponent. The sun was high when a rider appeared on the road to the capital. Espen rode his faithful Grimsborg, and behind him 2 horses followed on a lead. One, an old but still stately royal steed who had disappeared many years ago. The other, black as night itself, with eyes in which hellfire danced. The ground hissed beneath its hooves. People ran out of their houses and froze. Some fell to their knees. Some made the sign of the cross. The crowd parted in reverent terror. Espen rode silently through the streets, looking straight ahead. His path led to the palace. He had returned from a place of no return, and he led behind him living proof. Fire and darkness, obediently walking behind him on a lead. But evil does not forgive humiliation. At the very moment Espen rode into the palace courtyard, the sky turned black. Thunder rumbled, and at the gates a rider appeared. The Black Knight, huge, clad in armor darker than night. His horse, that same hell steed that had escaped its lead, pawed the ground, striking sparks. The knight's visor was raised, and behind it burned familiar eyes. The devil. He had broken out of the sack and come for revenge. "You deceived me, mortal," his voice boomed. "Now I challenge you to a fair fight. If you win, take the princess and the crown. If you lose, your soul is mine forever." The knights of the kingdom backed away. No one dared to raise their eyes. Espen slowly dismounted. He knew cunning would no longer help. The time had come for the final battle, open and fair. Everything was at stake: love, the kingdom, and his very soul. 2 riders met in the middle of the palace courtyard. But from the very first moment, it was clear This was not a battle of men, but of horses. Grimsborg began to shine. His piebald coat flared with silver, as if the dawn itself had descended to earth. Against him, the hell steed, black as the abyss, with flames lashing from its nostrils. Day against night, light against darkness. They collided with a crash that made the castle walls tremble. They reared up, two living towers, and crashed down upon each other. Hooves struck lightning, teeth tore at manes. The black horse breathed fire, but Grimsborg dodged and struck back, precisely, mercilessly. The riders struck with their swords, but their blows seemed only a shadow of the furious battle their steeds were waging. The ground trembled, the stones cracked. The crowd recoiled, unable to look away. This was not just a battle. This was a war of two worlds. A horse nurtured by kindness and faith against a horse born of hellfire. And the soul of the entire kingdom was at stake. The battle raged, but Grimsborg did not lose his senses. He waited, he watched, and he saw. Each time the hell horse breathed fire, it lost its balance for a moment. Grimsborg retreated, as if weakened. The black steed roared and unleashed the most furious pillar of fire. In that instant, Grimsborg struck. He crashed into his opponent with all his might, knocked its legs out from under it, and the hell horse collapsed, rolled across the stones, and lay still, crumbling into black ash. The Black Knight screamed. Without his steed, he was melting away like smoke in the wind. An instant, and all that remained of him was empty armor that clattered on the stones. Grimsborg reared up and let out a victorious cry. Light had conquered darkness. Loyalty had overcome malice. The king was beside himself with happiness. 3 times an unknown hero had saved his kingdom. From shame, from a monster, from the Lord of Darkness himself, and 3 times he had disappeared without giving his name. "Enough!" exclaimed the king. "I will find him, whoever he may be. Summon everyone to a feast." Messengers rushed to all corners of the world. Knights and nobles, princes and dukes gathered. Each secretly hoped the crown would fall to him. The feast hall shone with 1,000 candles. The tables groaned with food. Musicians played, goblets clinked. And in the farthest corner, in the shadow of a massive pillar, sat a young stable hand in a simple linen shirt. He quietly chewed his bread and spoke to no one. The hall buzzed with voices. Everyone dreamed of being the hero, but the true hero sat in the shadows, wanting neither fame nor honor. The king walked among the guests, questioning each one. "Was it you who climbed the glass mountain?" "It was I, my lord," one would bow. "Was it you who slew the troll?" "It was I, your majesty," another would chime in. But as soon as he asked for proof, the boasters turned pale and mumbled incoherently. The king grew gloomy. Then the princess approached him. "Allow me, father. she had been watching for a long time. She remembered the eyes of the knight who had appeared on the mountain 3 times. She remembered his hands, not delicate but strong, accustomed to labor. The princess took a golden platter on which lay 3 apples, the very ones she had given to the mysterious victor. And she slowly walked along the tables. She peered into their faces. She passed by the gaudily dressed knights, by the pompous princes. She walked on further, to where the candles burned more dimly. She was not just carrying apples, but 3 keys to the puzzle, and her heart told her which lock they would fit. The princess walked past all the noble guests, past the princes in velvet, past the dukes in gold, past the knights whose armor shone in the candlelight. She did not stop before a single one of them. She walked to the farthest corner of the hall, to where the shadows were thickest, and she stopped before a young man in a simple linen shirt. The whole fell silent. Hundreds of eyes stared at them. The princess held out the golden platter. "The one who obtained these apples," she said loudly and clearly, "risking his life, climbing the mountain 3 times, slaying the troll, and descending into the underworld itself. He is my savior and my groom." She looked into Espen's eyes. "I know it is you." Espen was silent for a moment. Then he smiled softly and took the apples from her hands. There was no longer any point in hiding. The princess recognized the hero not by the gleam of his armor, but by the light of his humble soul. A shout shattered the silence of the hall. "Lies! That is our brother, Espen the ash sifter. The fool who has spent his whole life sitting in the ashes. He is not capable of such things." The 11 brothers leaped to their feet, red with anger and shame. Espen calmly stood up. "I will tell you everything," and he told them about Grimsborg, born of fate, about the free ascents of the glass mountain, about the battle with the troll, about the descent into the underworld. Then he rolled up his sleeve and showed a scar, the mark of the hellfire that had licked his arm over the river of fire. "And here," he said, "is the final proof." He went out into the courtyard and returned, leading an old horse behind him. The very same black whirlwind whom everyone had thought was dead. The brothers turned pale and fell silent. His simple story proved more convincing than any boast. Behind every word was a deed. Espen was led to the royal chambers. Servants bustled around him. They washed him in hot water with fragrant herbs, washing away the soot and ash that seemed to have been ingrained in his skin forever. They trimmed his tangled hair. They dressed him in princely clothes, heavy velvet, embroidered with gold thread. When the doors of the hall swung open and he entered, the crowd gasped. Before them stood not a stable hand, not the ash sifter, not the ash fool. A stately young man with clear eyes and a proud posture. The clothes fit him as if he had been born in them. The ash and soot which had been his mask were washed away, and the kingdom saw the true face of its hero, a face that shone brighter than any gold. The 11 brothers stood at a distance, not daring to raise their eyes. The very same brothers who had laughed at him, who had not left him a single penny of their father's inheritance, who had called him the ash fool and a disgrace to their family. Slowly, one by one, they approached him, and they fell to their knees. "Forgive us, brother," the eldest said in a hollow voice. "We were blind, we were cruel. We do not deserve your forgiveness." Espen looked at them, at these big, strong men who had bowed their heads before him. His heart knew no malice. It never had. He bent down and raised his eldest brother from his knees. Then he hugged him, and the others, one by one. "What's past is past," he said simply. "We are one family." The one who was considered the last forgave them first, and in this was his greatest victory. The kingdom had never seen such a wedding. Espen and the princess stood before the altar, and the bells rang so loudly they could be heard at the edge of the world. Guests gathered from all lands, kings and queens, dukes and counts, common people and noble knights. But the most honored guest was not seated at the table. A separate place was set for Grimsborg, right in the feast hall. Before him stood silver buckets of choice oats, and servants brought him apples on golden platters. When the king raised his cup, the hall fell silent. "To my son-in-law," he proclaimed, "to his beautiful bride, and to the one without whom there would have been no feats, no victory, to the glorious Grimsborg." "To Grimsborg," the hall thundered. The horse shook its silver mane, and I swear it smiled. At this feast they honored not only the king and queen, but also the one who was their protector, their comrade in arms, and their most faithful friend. Espen became king. He ruled wisely and justly, and the people loved him. The 11 brothers, once proud and arrogant, became his loyal support and right hand. They never again judged a person by their clothes. The queen was his faithful companion, and Grimsborg, until his very last day, his most devoted advisor. And the story of Espen the Ash Sifter became a legend. It was passed down from mouth to mouth, from father to son, from mother to daughter. The story of how a heroic steed can be hidden in the most unremarkable foal, and of how the heart of a hero, capable of conquering the glass mountain and defeating the Lord of Darkness himself, can beat in the quietest simpleton, warming his hands over the ashes. And the children in that kingdom, for a long time after, would say to each other, "Do not laugh at the one who sits in the ashes, for it is in the ashes that the brightest fire is born." In a seaside kingdom, where the castle towers gleamed in the sun like pearls, lived a young prince named Yvon. He was handsome, well-built, and strong, the best student in all the knightly arts. The sword in his hand sang as if it were alive, and his arrows flew straight to their mark. But the prince grew up within the marble walls of the palace, among servants and flatterers,
and knew neither hunger nor deceit nor human baseness. He knew the world from maps and heroic deeds from ballads, and his heart, full of courage, yearned to trade the pages of books for the salty spray of a real ocean. And when Yvon turned 18, he went to his father the king and announced he would set off on a sea voyage to see distant lands and prove that he was worthy of his future throne. For, the young prince thought, what kind of ruler would he be if he did not know the world he was meant to rule?
The prince's ship was beautiful. White sails, a carved stern, a crew of the kingdom's best sailors. The first days of the voyage passed easily. The sea lay like a silk road. Dolphins played alongside, and Yvon stood at the bow, breathing in the salty wind of freedom. But on the 7th night, the sky turned black, as if someone had overturned a cauldron of ink upon it. The wind, appearing from nowhere, roared with the voice of an ancient monster. The waves rose up to the very clouds. It was not water, but living mountains, thirsting for destruction. The sailors fought to the last. But what can a man do against the fury of the elements? Unseen rocks tore open the ship's bottom like the claws of a beast. The crack of wood, the cries of men, and then silence. Thus, the prince's first journey, which began with a favorable wind of hope, ended with the roar of a hurricane that in one moment washed from the deck both his crew and his naive dreams. Only Yvon, clinging to a piece of the mast, was left bobbing among the waves, alone in the middle of the endless black water. The waves tossed Yvon all night, as if playing with a rag doll, and only at dawn did they cast him onto a rocky shore. The prince lay gasping for air, and when his strength returned and he raised his head, his heart clenched with cold. This was not an island, but a graveyard. Instead of sand, sharp stones; instead of seashells, blackened bones scattered everywhere. The trees here grew gnarled and dead, their bare branches reaching for the sky like the hands of drowned men. No bird, no beast, only a heavy, oppressive silence. And there, in the distance, on top of a cliff as sharp as a fang, stood a castle of black stone, huge, ugly, resembling the crown of an evil king. Its windows glowed with a dim crimson light. Yvon understood. He had been saved from the fury of the sea, only to fall into the quiet embrace of horror. And the castle on the cliff looked down on him, like a predator that has spotted new, helpless prey. For 2 days, Yvon spent on the cursed shore. Not a stream, not an edible root, only stones and bones. Hunger and thirst gnawed at him from within, and the prince realized either he would enter the castle or he would die here on these black stones. And so he went. The gates swung open by themselves, as if they had been waiting for him, and behind them stood the master. The ogre
was enormous, twice the height of any man. His arms resembled tree trunks. Yellow fangs stuck out of his mouth, and his small eyes burned with a hungry, predatory fire. He smelled of blood and death.
Yvon reached for his sword, preparing to die in battle. But the monster did not attack. It tilted its head, looked the prince over from head to toe, well-fed, young, and suddenly stretched its lips into a smile. "Come in, traveler," the ogre boomed in a voice as sweet as rotten honey. "Rest, eat, and tomorrow we'll see what you're good for." And he smiled the way a spider smiles when it sees a beautiful fat fly has flown into its web on its own. The ogre pushed Yvon into a huge, gloomy hall and slammed the door behind him. The prince looked around and froze. A girl was sitting by the extinguished hearth. She was dressed in a simple servant's dress. Her hair was gathered in a modest braid, her hands calloused from work. But the way she held her back, the way she raised her head at his appearance, only queens hold themselves that way. She was beautiful, but that was not what struck Yvon. In her eyes, there was neither fear nor despair, only a smart, defiant spark, as if she knew something no one else knew. She looked at the prince the way an experienced prisoner looks at a newcomer, with sympathy, but without pity. "My name is Finette," she said calmly. "Welcome to the monster's lair." And Yvon understood. This girl had been a captive in the cursed castle longer than he had been alive. But there was more freedom in her gaze than in all his naive dreams of adventure. When the ogre's heavy footsteps faded into the depths of the castle, Finette sat down next to Yvon and began to speak in a whisper, so quietly that he could barely hear her words over the beating of his own heart. "Listen carefully, Prince, for your life depends on it." She told him her story. She was the daughter of a powerful, good wizard, the ogre's sworn enemy. The monster had kidnapped her as a child, hoping to pry out the secrets of her father's magic. But Finette had remained silent all these years. "I too possess magic," she whispered, "but the dark curse of this castle binds my power. I can only perform miracles in secret, bit by bit." Then her eyes grew serious. "The ogre will not let you go. Tomorrow he will give you a task, impossible for a mortal. And when you fail, he will eat you with a clear conscience." And her whisper was for Yvon both a story of an old tragedy and an instruction manual for survival in a house where any dinner could be the last. As soon as dawn broke, the door burst open with a crash. The ogre stood on the threshold, baring his fangs in anticipation of fun. "Get up, little worker. Time to earn my bread." He led Yvon into the castle courtyard. There, in the middle of the stone slabs, stood a mountain. No, a whole cliff of sharp cobblestones, grey boulders, and granite blocks. It was taller than the highest tower, and its shadow covered the entire courtyard. "Here is your first task," the ogre boomed mockingly. "In one night, You will break this entire mountain into fine sand, so that it's like flour, understand? If by morning there's even one little stone left, I'll eat you for breakfast." He laughed so hard that the walls trembled and left without even looking back. Why should he? 100 men couldn't complete such a task in a whole year. Yvon stood alone before the stone colossus. His sword and courage were useless here. He realized his life was now worth no more than one of these cold, silent stones.
All day Yvon struck the stones, blooding his hands, but by sunset he had barely chipped off a few pathetic fragments. He sat at the foot of the stone mountain, looking at his wounded palms, and waited for the dawn that would bring him death. Then Finette emerged from the shadows. "Do not grieve, Prince," she said softly. "Go into the castle and go to sleep. The morning is wiser than the evening." Yvon wanted to object, but something in her voice made him obey. He left and fell into a heavy, restless sleep. But Finette remained. She took a tiny wand from the folds of her dress, as thin as a willow twig, and touched the stone colossus with it 3 times. Her lips whispered words in a language that was old when the world was still young, and the stones heard. They trembled, they cracked, and began to crumble, turning into fine, white sand.
Thus, while the prince slept and had nightmares, she performed miracles in the waking world, and their quiet whisper proved stronger than the hardness of stone. When the ogre saw a mountain of white sand where the stones had loomed the evening before, his face turned black with fury. He roared so loudly that crows fell from the towers. But his word had been given, and the monster, grinding its teeth, retreated. "Fine," he hissed. "Here is a new task for you." He led Yvon to a huge pit dug for the foundation of a new tower. Overnight, the rains had filled it to the brim with black, cold water. Bail it out to the last drop. By dawn. If you don't make it, expect no mercy. In the evening, everything repeated itself. Yvon sat by the pit in despair, but Finette again told him to go to sleep and trust her. And at night, she went out under the stars and stretched her wand over the water. Her lips whispered ancient words, and the water obeyed. It rose from its earthen bed, gathered into a huge cloud, and flew away, leaving behind only dry, astonished earth. In the morning, the ogre stood over the dry pit, and the veins on his neck bulged with rage. He was not stupid. He understood everything. It was Finette. It was her cursed sorcery. All these years she had pretended to be weak, while she was gathering strength, waiting for her moment. But his rage was cold, calculating. He stretched a smile onto his face and turned to Yvon. "Well, Prince," he said almost gently, "you are a great worker. I have never seen your like. Tomorrow I will hold a feast in your honor, a real celebration." Yvon, not believing his luck, bowed and left, and the ogre watched him go.
the smile slowly sliding from his face. When the prince's footsteps faded, he whispered,
I will hold a feast, but the main course will be the two of you, my lovebirds. His cunning had run out, and in its place came a simple, primal hunger. Finette possessed not only power, but also a secret hearing. Her magic allowed her to hear what evil hearts whispered. And when the ogre whispered his sentence, she heard every word. She found Yvon in the hall and grabbed his hand. We are in mortal danger, she whispered, her eyes burning. He plans to eat us both tomorrow. We have only this one night. Yvon turned pale. Flee? But where? The island was surrounded by sea, and there was no boat. Fleeing is not enough, Finette said, as if reading his thoughts. As long as he is alive, he will hunt us. We must finish him once and for all. And she laid out her plan. That same pit she had drained, deep with sheer walls. If they could lure the ogre there, your task is to anger him and lead him to the edge, she whispered. Mine is to give the final push. He is strong, but foolish in his rage. Thus the pit, which the monster had dug as a trap for them, was to become a grave for him in her clever plan. When the moon rose over the castle, Yvon went out into the courtyard and shouted, Master, Master, trouble! Water is gushing from the pit. The ogre flew out of the castle, red with fury. He had been woken up, he had been deceived. And by whom? A pathetic prince. You worm, he roared, advancing on Yvon. What water? Yvon stood at the very edge of the pit, not retreating. See for yourself if you don't believe me, he said, pointing down. The ogre stepped to the edge, leaned over, and at that moment, Finette darted from the shadows. She struck him in the back with her whole body, putting into the push both her strength and years of hatred. The ogre flailed his arms and with a wild roar flew into the black void. But Finette had already raised her wand. A word, and the mountain of white sand poured into the pit, burying the monster beneath it. The roar was choked off. It became quiet. Thus the girl's cunning and the youth's courage merged into one, sent the mighty villain into the very void he had prepared for them. Run! Finette shouted as soon as the sand had swallowed the monster's last roar. He has a wife, and she is more terrible than he is. They rushed through the castle. Finette knew every corridor, every door, and led Yvon unerringly. But at the treasury she stopped. Wait! She darted inside, past piles of gold, past chests of gems. She needed none of it. She grabbed only 3 items: a small pocket mirror, a comb of ivory, and a silk ribbon for her hair. These are my father's things, she tossed out on the run. We will need them yet. The castle gates were left behind. They ran across the dead island, through the gnarled trees and black stones, away from their prison. And the echo of their steps was the only music of freedom in this silent kingdom of death. The roar of her falling husband woke her.
The ogre's wife was even more terrible than her spouse, as huge as a mountain, with hands capable of tearing trees out by the roots, and eyes burning with hellfire. She went out into the courtyard and saw. The pit was filled with sand. The gates were wide open. The prisoners were gone. She understood everything. The shriek that tore from her throat was more terrible than any storm. The castle shuddered to its foundations. Stones rained from the towers, and the crows sleeping on the walls fell down dead from the mere sound of her grief. But her grief lasted only a moment. Then came rage. "I will find them," she snarled, sniffing the night air. "I will find them and tear them to pieces."
And she set off in pursuit. If her husband had been merely hungry, she was driven by vengeance. And that force is 100 times more terrible than simple hunger. The ogress did not give chase immediately. She was more cunning than her husband. Instead, she headed for his secret storeroom, where his greatest treasure was kept. 7-league boots, magical footwear that made each step 7 miles long. She pulled them onto her enormous feet and left the castle. One step, and she was already on top of the highest mountain on the island. A second, and she was at its foot, on the shore where the waters of the strait began. She looked around, sniffed the air, and saw them. 2 tiny figures running along the distant shore of the mainland. A smile twisted her ugly face. "There you are, little birds." And she laughed, a terrible, triumphant laugh, and leaped across the strait. The ground beneath the fugitive's feet trembled from her approach. Each of her steps was the blow of a hammer of fate, relentlessly closing the distance between hunter and prey. They ran as fast as they could, but the ground behind them shook more and more violently. The stomping, the laughter, the monster's breath, hot and foul, was already touching the backs of their necks. Yvon looked back and went cold. The ogress was so close, he could see every one of her yellow fangs. "We won't make it," he cried in despair. "The mirror," Finette commanded. "Throw the mirror." Yvon snatched the small mirror from his pocket and threw it over his shoulder without looking back. The mirror touched the ground, and the world changed. The tiny shard of glass trembled, shone, and began to grow. It grew and grew until it became a gigantic wall of ice, as smooth as polished marble and as sheer as a cliff. It rose higher and higher, piercing the clouds, splitting the sky in two. The ogress crashed into it at a run and howled in pain and fury. Her clothes slid on the ice, finding no purchase. Thus, a fragile shard of glass that reflected faces became an unbreakable wall that reflected death itself. And the fugitives, without losing a moment, rushed away. The ogress crashed into the ice wall at a run and was thrown back. She jumped up, roared, and brought her fists down on the barrier. Once, twice, a third time. But the ice, born of magic, was harder than any stone. Blood spurted from her broken knuckles, but not a scratch was left on the wall. She howled in helpless rage. But the ogress was not stupid. Turning around, she took 7 steps and was back at the castle. There, in her husband's forge, hung his iron pickaxe, which he used to crush rocks for his towers. The ogress grabbed it and returned to the wall in 7 steps. The first blow, and a crack ran across the ice. The second, and shards flew in all directions. Each of her blows was a blow of hatred, and she hacked her way through the magic ice with a persistence that knew neither pain nor fatigue. Yvon and Finette ran without looking back, as long as their legs could carry them. The ice wall had bought them precious time, and they had managed to get far away, across fields, over hills, through a dried-up riverbed. But then a crack sounded behind them, as if the sky itself had split. And then a triumphant roar and the familiar thunder of 7 league steps. She had broken through. "The comb!" Finette shouted, not slowing her pace. "Throw the comb!" Yvon threw the small ivory comb over his shoulder, an elegant little thing that could fit in the palm of his hand. But when the comb touched the ground, its fine teeth trembled and began to grow. They stretched upward, thickened, became covered with bark, and turned into mighty trunks. Branches intertwined with branches. Roots dug into the earth. In a matter of moments, a forest grew behind the fugitives, dark, dense, and terrifying. The trees stood so close together that not even a mouse could squeeze between them, and their branches were as sharp as 1,000 needles. Thus, a small item, created to comb silk hair, became an impassable thicket, capable of stopping the step of death itself. The ogress crashed into the thorny forest like a storm against a cliff. She tried to break through directly, but the branches, sharp as knives, dug into her flesh, tore her clothes, and slashed her face with bloody furrows. She recoiled, howling in pain and fury. But stop? Never. 7 steps, and she was back at the castle. In her husband's shed hung the axe with which he felled ancient oaks in a single blow. The ogress grabbed it and returned to the forest in 7 steps. The first swing, and 3 trees fell at once. The second, and a breach appeared in the thicket. She chopped tirelessly, not noticing her wounds, not feeling the pain. Wood chips flew in all directions. Trunks fell like straws, and the sound of her axe echoed over the magical forest like a countdown, relentless, merciless, bringing the hour of reckoning for the fugitives ever closer. Yvon and Finette were running with their last strength. Their legs were giving out. Their breath burned their chests. But ahead, beyond the last hill, a blue strip of sea was already gleaming. Salvation was so close. And then the earth shuddered. The crack of falling trees, the crunch of breaking trunks, and above the treetops of the magical forest, the ogress's head appeared.
Her eyes blazed with madness. Her axe was raised to strike. "The ribbon!" Finette shouted. "Throw the ribbon!" Yvon tore the silk ribbon from his wrist and threw it on the ground.
The thin strip of fabric touched the grass and came to life. It trembled, writhed like a snake, began to grow and widen. Water gushed from it, first as a trickle, then a stream, then a river. In an instant, a wide, turbulent river with a furious current and roaring whirlpools spread out before the ogress. The waves rose higher than a man's height. Thus the thin silk ribbon that once adorned a girl's hair became an insurmountable water barrier, and its delicate pattern turned into furious roaring waves. The ogress burst out of the forest and froze on the bank. The river roared before her, wide, turbulent, merciless. She stepped into the water, and the current immediately knocked her off her feet. She surfaced, gasping for air, tried again, but the waves tossed her about like a wood chip. She could not swim, and the magical river knew no mercy. Howling with helpless rage, the ogress scrambled back to the bank. She stood knee-deep in the water, shaking her bloodied fists and shouting terrible curses after the departing figures. But her words were drowned out by the roar of the water. Thus, the mighty ogress, capable of breaking through ice and chopping through a forest, was stopped by a simple river. Her fury broke against the water like a wave against a cliff. And Yvon and Finette, staggering with exhaustion, reached the seashore and collapsed onto the warm sand, alive and free. They sat on the sand, looking at the endless sea. Freedom, but what was the use? There was only water all around, and they didn't even have the strength to stand up. And then Finette whispered, "Look!" A dot appeared on the horizon. It grew, took shape, masts, sails, a flag. Yvon jumped up, not believing his eyes. He knew that ship. He knew those colors on the flag. "It's my father's ship," he shouted, his voice breaking. "He sent it for me." Yvon waved his arms, shouted, jumped, but the ship was too far away. Then Finette stood up, gathered the last remnants of her strength, and threw a blinding flash of light into the sky, as bright as a small sun. The ship stopped, and then, slowly, majestically, it turned and set a course for the shore. The white sail on the horizon, like a seagull's wing, became for them not just a ship. It became news from home, a promise of salvation, and the end of their long exile. A boat from the ship was already gliding toward the shore. Yvon, overflowing with happiness, turned to Finette and reached out his hands to her, to hug, to kiss the one who had saved his life, the one who had become dearer to him than anything in the world. But she stepped back, pressing her palm to his lips. "Don't you dare, my love," alarm rang in her voice. "Don't kiss me here. Such is the last magic of this cursed place. Whoever leaves the island having experienced a kiss of love on its shore, will forget everything that happened to him here. Everything and me. She took his hands in hers. Sail alone, but when you arrive home, kiss no one. Not your mother, not your father, not even your dog. Immediately send a carriage for me, and then we will be together forever. Yvon looked into her eyes and swore by all that was holy. I will do everything. I will never forget you. He got into the boat and pushed off from the shore. Thus, on the very threshold of happiness, the last, most cunning curse stood between them. The curse of forgetting, which threatened to take not life, but the very memory of love. His home harbor met Yvon with shouts of joy and the ringing of bells. The king and queen ran toward him along the pier with open arms, and behind them, the entire court. Yvon remembered. He stepped back, gently pushing his mother away. Wait, I beg you. First I must send a carriage. He had already opened his mouth to give the order. And then a red whirlwind burst from the crowd. His old hunting dog, a faithful childhood friend whom he had not seen for so long, rushed to her master with a yelp. She jumped on his chest and, whining with happiness, licked him right in the face. One innocent, devoted kiss. Yvon froze. Something flickered in his eyes and went out. He slowly lowered the dog to the ground and looked around, as if waking from a dream. What was I going to say? He didn't remember. Not the island, not the monster, not the girl with the defiant spark in her eyes. Everything had vanished, as if it had never been. Thus, an innocent kiss of loyalty became an instrument of betrayal, and the memory of a great love was erased by a single touch of a dog's tongue. Finette waited. The first day she spent on the shore, gazing at the horizon. He will return, she told herself. He promised. A week passed. The sea brought only empty waves. A month passed. The seagulls cried above her head, as if laughing at her hope. Finette sat on the very stone where they had said goodbye, and watched the water until her eyes began to tear from the salt and wind. She did not cry. She was too proud for tears. But with each passing day, something inside her faded. She understood. He had broken the prohibition. He had forgotten her, not out of malice, not out of betrayal, but because of the curse of this land. But that only made it more painful, and each new sunrise that did not bring the sails of his ship was for her a small death of her hope. She was left alone, betrayed and forgotten. For 3 days and 3 nights, Finette cried. Her tears were as bitter as sea salt and as hot as her broken heart. But on the 4th day, she stood up, wiped her face, and looked at the horizon with different eyes. Not the eyes of a jilted bride, but the eyes of a warrior. He has forgotten me, she said aloud, and her voice did not tremble. But I remember him. If he cannot come for his happiness, then I will bring it to him myself. This was her second decision, and it was harder than the first. To defeat the ogre, that is a battle with a monster, but to defeat forgetting, that is a battle with emptiness, with something that can be neither struck nor outwitted. And yet she resolved to do it. Now, far from the cursed castle, her magic returned to her in full force. Finette stretched out her hands and felt the power flowing through her veins, obedient and mighty. She decided, if his memory of her had drowned in the sea of oblivion, then she herself would become the ship to pull it out. Finette knew, if she appeared in Yvonne's kingdom as a beggar, no one would notice her. But if she came as a queen, the whole world would turn its gaze upon her. And then, perhaps, he would look too. She went out onto the deserted shore, to where the waves licked the stones, and raised her hands to the sky. Magic poured from her like a river that had broken a dam. The earth trembled. From the sand and rocks, walls began to rise, first white as bone, then golden as the dawn sun. Towers grew, piercing the clouds. Windows flashed with crystal light. Spires were crowned with stars. By dawn, on the deserted shore, stood a palace the likes of which the world had never seen. Its walls shone with pure gold. Its columns were carved from ivory, and the light from it could be seen far across the sea. Thus, on the shore where she had shed tears of despair, in one night grew the palace of her indomitable will, a fortress from which she would begin her final battle for love. The palace was beautiful, but empty. The echo of Finette's footsteps wandered through the golden halls, and the silence weighed on her shoulders. A queen needs a retinue, but Finette did not summon living people. Instead, she set to work like a skilled watchmaker. From gold and silver, from bronze and copper, she forged herself servants, lackeys with faces cast from bright gold, maids with hands of polished silver, guards in armor of blackened bronze. She breathed movement into them, and they came to life. They walked, bowed, spoke courteous words, but in their gemstone eyes there was no soul, only the cold gleam of a mechanism. The castle filled with the quiet whirring of gears and the steady ticking. Thus Finette surrounded herself with a retinue whose loyalty was flawless, for it was forged from gold, and their hearts were clockwork mechanisms that could never betray. Everything was ready. And what of Yvon? He lived in his kingdom as before, only now a strange emptiness gaped in his soul. He did not know where it came from. He did not remember the storm, nor the island, nor the girl with the defiant spark in her eyes. For him, it was all a dream he had never dreamed. His parents saw that their son had returned different, quieter, more thoughtful. But they decided it was his age. It was time for him to settle down. "We have found you a bride," the king announced, "a beautiful princess from a neighboring kingdom. The wedding will be in 3 days." Yvon looked at his father with empty eyes and nodded. "Very well, father, as you say." What could he object? His heart was silent. And he prepared to give his hand to one he did not love, not knowing that his heart had long been given to one he did not remember. On the wedding day, when the palace was drowning in flowers and music, a carriage stopped at the gates, the likes of which the kingdom had never seen. Made entirely of pure gold, it shone brighter than the sun, and it was pulled by horses whiter than snow. From the carriage stepped a lady in a dress studded with precious stones. Her face was hidden by a thin veil, and behind her walked servants, silent, with faces of polished metal. A whisper ran through the hall. Who was she? From where? What queen could afford such luxury? Yvon stood at the altar next to his bride, but his gaze turned to the stranger of its own accord. Something stirred in his chest, strange, vague, like the echo of a forgotten dream. He did not recognize her, but his heart began to beat faster. Finette entered his celebration like a shadow from a forgotten past. Her silence was louder than the music, and her mystery more interesting than any conversation. When it was time for gifts, the guests brought gold, silks, and gems to the throne. But the mysterious lady rose from her seat and walked through the crowd, carrying only 3 small items on a velvet cushion. "I have brought gifts from distant lands," she said, and her voice was like music. She held up the first item, a tiny model of an ice wall, no bigger than her palm. The air around it sparkled with frost, and the guests gasped. Then she showed a small bone comb. She placed it on the table, and from its teeth grew a tiny tree with real leaves. The third was a silk ribbon. Finette threw it into a goblet of wine, and the wine boiled, bubbled, turning into a miniature stream that flowed onto the tablecloth. The hall froze in astonishment, but Finette looked only at Yvon. "These are but small miracles," she said quietly, "reminders of greater miracles." She was not giving him gifts, but memories. 3 small keys to 3 large doors in his locked memory. And she waited, holding her breath. Would even one of them open? Yvon looked at the 3 small miracles, and something strange was happening in his head. It spun, blood pounded in his temples, and then the images came. An ice wall, huge, up to the clouds, a thorny forest that grew from nowhere, a turbulent river born from a silk ribbon, a pit full of sand, the yellow fangs of a monster. And she, a girl with a defiant spark in her eyes, who whispered to him, "Kiss no one." The 3 small miracles became 3 hammer blows that shattered the wall of oblivion, and behind its fragments he finally saw everything. Yvon sprang from his throne so abruptly that the goblet flew to the floor. He looked at the veiled guest, and his eyes were full of tears. "Finette," he shouted to the whole hall, and in this cry merged the pain of loss, the joy of rediscovery, and the bitterness of remorse. "It's you. Forgive me. Forgive me." He rushed to her through the crowd, frozen in astonishment. Yvon rushed to her, seeing no one around, not the frozen guests, not the pale bride, not his astonished parents. He fell to his knees before Finette, right in the middle of the hall. "Forgive me," his voice broke. I forgot you. I broke my vow. I am not worthy. Finette slowly raised her hands and removed her veil. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but her eyes shone. Stand up, she said softly, raising him from his knees. It was not your fault. It was evil sorcery, not your betrayal. The important thing is, you remembered. You came back to me. Thus his memory, upon returning, first asked for forgiveness, and her love, having waited, first granted that forgiveness. Yvon took Finette's hand and led her to the throne. The hall fell into a dead silence. He turned to the guests, to his parents, to the princess who stood at the altar in her wedding dress. There was no doubt in his eyes. "Forgive me," he said loudly and clearly, "but I cannot marry one whom I do not love. My heart and my honor have long belonged to another, to the one who saved my life, whom I, through the fault of evil spells, consigned to oblivion." He turned to Finette and raised her hand high above his head. "Here is my one and true bride, my savior, your future queen." His word, firm and clear, cut through the silence of the throne room like a sword, severing the false union and protecting the true one. And no one dared to object, for everyone saw. It was not a boy speaking, but a king. The jilted bride, red with shame and anger, left the palace with her retinue. But no one looked after her. All eyes were on the true couple. And then began a celebration, the likes of which the kingdom had never known. The musicians played more merrily. The servants brought out the best wines, and the cooks outdid themselves. Yvon and Finette were married under the vaults of the ancient cathedral, and the bells rang so joyfully that they could be heard for leagues around. At the feast, in the most honored seats, sat Finette's gold and silver servants, silent witnesses to her lonely struggle. The guests raised their goblets not only to the prince's courage, but also to the wisdom, loyalty, and indomitable strength of his bride. Thus, the celebration, which began as a triumph of forgetting, turned into a celebration of restored memory. And it was the merriest feast ever seen in that kingdom. King Yvon and Queen Finette ruled their kingdom for many years, wisely and justly. His courage and her wisdom complemented each other, like a sword and a shield, like the sun and the moon. And their amazing story became the kingdom's most beloved legend. It was told by fireplaces on winter evenings. It was sung by minstrels in the squares. The legend of how even the most powerful magic of forgetting is powerless against true love, and of how the greatest knightly valor and the most indomitable strength can be hidden in the heart of a beautiful and intelligent maiden who does not wait for salvation, but creates it herself with her own hands. And they ruled together, and in their kingdom, loyalty and the memory of the heart were valued above all else. For the king and queen had proven, with their own fate, that this is the greatest and most fragile treasure in the world. And that's the end of the tale. In a certain kingdom, in a certain land, there once lived a king. He was wise and just, but the years had taken their toll. A grave illness bound his body, and he felt the fire of life fading within him. The king had 3 sons. The 2 elder sons were stately and proud, with broad shoulders and a sharp gaze. But their hearts were cold, like winter iron. They looked upon their ailing father and thought not of how to ease his suffering, but of whose head would be the first to wear the golden crown. The youngest son, Yvon was neither as mighty nor as fearsome in appearance, but his soul was bright and pure, like spring water. He alone sat by his father's bedside, holding his weakening hand, and sincere tears clouded his eyes. And at the bed of the fading sovereign stood 3 hopes, but only one of them was real. For 2 mourned the future kingdom, and only one mourned the departing father. One evening, when the sunset painted the sky in crimson tones, the king ordered his sons to be summoned to his bedside. His voice was weak, but his eyes burned with a strange, distant light. "There is a legend," he said, "as ancient as the sea itself. Far, far away, across thrice 9 lands, in the depths of the blue sea, lives the Golden Mermaid. Her hair flows like molten gold. Her eyes shine with the depth of sapphires, and her skin shimmers with the mother of pearl of the dawn waves." The king fell silent, catching his breath, and continued, "But her greatest miracle is not in her beauty. They say her voice is life itself. A single song from the Golden Mermaid can heal any ailment, return the strength of youth to an old man, and ignite the fading fire in a dying man's chest. No mortal has seen her with their own eyes. Many have searched. None have found her. But the legend has lived for centuries, passed down in whispers from father to son." And he spoke of her not as a living creature, but as the last song he wished to hear before eternal silence took him forever. The next morning, the king gathered his last strength. His voice grew stronger, as if his former authority had returned for a moment, and he pronounced his will. "My days are numbered, my sons. I feel death standing at the threshold, and so I declare, the one of you who fulfills my last request will inherit the crown and my entire kingdom." He looked over his sons with his fading gaze. "Set out on your journey. Find the Golden Mermaid and bring her to me, so that I may hear her wondrous singing before I leave this world." The elder brothers glanced at each other, and a greedy fire flared in their eyes. They were not thinking of their father, but of the crown that would shine on the victor's head. Each already saw himself on the throne, and was plotting how to outwit the other. Only Ivan Tsarevich lowered his head, and his heart clenched with pain. He did not want the crown. He wanted only one thing: to save his father. Thus, the king's last hope became a race for power for 2 of his sons, and only for one, a path of mercy. The elder sons did not delay. After asking for their father's blessing, They took the best steeds from the royal stable, filled their saddlebags with gold, and set off with great pomp. The people saw them off, bowing, for one of them would soon be king. But the castle towers had barely disappeared behind the hills when the eldest brother reined in his horse. "Listen," he said to the middle brother. "Why should we search for who knows what in the blue sea? Father is old and weak. He doesn't have long. And we have plenty of gold. Let's live for our own pleasure for a while." The middle brother burst out laughing in reply. Soon they were sitting in a roadside tavern, draining cup after cup. Their drunken tongues loosened, and the brothers boasted to everyone around that they were riding off to find the greatest treasure in the world. Thus, their great quest for a miracle ended almost as soon as it began, drowning not in the depths of the sea, but in a barrel of cheap tavern wine. When the dust from his brother's hooves had settled on the road, Ivan Tsarevich quietly approached the royal bed. He knelt and took his father's hand. "Father," he said softly, "bless me for the journey as well. Perhaps fate will be kind, and I will be able to ease your sorrow." The king looked into his youngest son's honest eyes, and a tear rolled down his cheek. With a trembling hand, he made the sign of the cross over Yvon and whispered, "Go with God, my son." Ivan asked for neither gold nor an entourage. In the stable, he chose not the finest steed, but a simple yet sturdy horse. In his travel sack, he placed only a crust of bread and a flask of spring water. Without trumpets or praise, he left the castle at dawn. No one saw him off. Only the morning mist swirled beneath his horse's hooves. He was leaving not for a crown, but for a song. And his only treasure on this journey was his own pure soul. Whether Ivan Tsarevich rode for a long time or a short time, his path led him through a dense forest. Ancient spruces closed in overhead, and even the midday sun could barely break through their dark crowns. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a desperate bird's cry, hoarse, full of pain. It was followed by a vicious snarl. Ivan spurred his horse and rode out into a small clearing. What he saw made his heart clench. A red fox, cunning and merciless, had cornered a large black raven among the roots of an old oak tree. The bird was bravely fighting back with its powerful beak, but one of its wings hung broken and helpless. The raven could not fly, and its strength was fading with every moment. The fox sensed this and circled ever closer, preparing for the final pounce. And in the middle of the dense forest, Ivan saw not just a predator's hunt, but an eternal story, where cunning tried to destroy wounded nobility. Without a moment's hesitation, he drew his bow and nocked an arrow. The bowstring sang, and the arrow struck the ground right at the fox's paws. The red predator yelped in fear and darted away, vanishing into the forest thicket. Ivan dismounted and slowly approached the wounded bird. The raven watched him warily, ready to defend itself to its last breath.
Do not be afraid, Yvon said quietly, crouching beside it. I will not harm you.
He took a clean handkerchief from his bag, the only one he had for the journey. With careful but steady movements, he bandaged the broken wing, trying not to cause any extra pain. Then Yvon took out his last crust of bread, softened it in water from his flask, and brought it to the exhausted bird's beak. The raven hesitated, but hunger won, and it began to eat. Thus Yvon gave away his last bread and his only handkerchief, asking for nothing in return. And this simple act of kindness turned out to be the most profitable deal of his life. The raven pecked up the last crumbs, shook itself, and then, with a single beat of its healthy wing, flew up to a lower branch of the oak. It bowed its head, looking intently at Yvon, with eyes as black as the night sky. And then it spoke. I thank you, Yvon Sadovich. A clear human voice rang out. You saved me from certain doom. Yvon took a step back, not believing his ears. Do not be surprised, the raven continued. I am no ordinary bird. I have lived in this world for 300 years, and I know many secrets hidden from human eyes. The Tsarevich stood, unable to utter a word. I see the purity of your heart, the raven said, and its voice warmed. For your selfless kindness, I will help you in your trouble. I know where you are headed and whom you seek. And the voice Yvon heard was not a bird's cry, but the speech of an ancient sage. In that moment, the forest around them ceased to be just a forest. It became a gateway to a great fairy tale. Yvon's heart filled with hope, and he told the raven everything about his ailing father, the ancient legend, and the Golden Mermaid whose song could heal any ailment. The wise raven listened and slowly shook its black head. Your goal is noble, Tsarevich, but the path to it is long and cunning, it said. You cannot simply get the Golden Mermaid. She is the beloved daughter of the Sea King, and he guards her more closely than all the pearls and corals of his underwater kingdom. Yvon frowned. But what am I to do? Listen carefully, the raven continued. The Sea King will give up his daughter only in exchange for what he desires above all else in the world, the golden horse. That horse gallops faster than the wind, and its mane shines like the sun itself. That is what the Sea King needs. Yvon froze. It turned out he needed to search not for the mermaid, but for the horse. Thus his straight and clear path turned into a tangled knot, and to reach the sea, he first had to conquer the land. But where can I find this golden horse? Yvon asked. I know where, the raven answered. It stands in the stable of a mighty warrior king who rules a kingdom across thrice 9 lands from here. The journey is not short. The raven spread its wings and flapped them once, then twice. The wing that had hung broken that morning now moved freely. Yvon's care had healed it faster than any healer could. Climb onto my back, Tsarevich, the raven commanded. Your good horse is too slow for such a journey, and I will carry you faster than the wind." Yvon, marveling at the miracle, carefully climbed onto the bird's broad back. In that same instant, the raven pushed off from the branch and soared upward, cutting through the clouds with its powerful wings. And the land below rushed by like a colorful carpet. Forests, rivers, villages. For the first time, Yvon understood how small the world is when you look at it from a bird's eye view and fly on the wings of wisdom itself.
Whether they flew for a long time or a short time, the raven began to descend. Below them spread a mighty kingdom, with fortresses, towers, and endless fields. Landing on a hill at the border, the raven turned to Yvon. "We are almost at our goal, Tsarevich. But know this, you cannot simply get the golden horse either." Yvon sighed. "What is needed?" "Its master, the warrior king, values neither gold nor silver," the raven said. "His soul craves only unseen wonders. He will give up his horse only in exchange for the golden bird that lives in the garden of Tsar Afron." "The golden bird?" Yvon repeated. "Yes, its feathers burn like a candle's flame, and it sings so sweetly that under its song men and beasts fall asleep, and even the wind itself grows still, listening." Yvon stared silently into the distance. It turned out he needed to search not for the horse, but for the bird.
And he understood. His path was not a straight road, but a staircase, and to step onto one step,
He first had to find another, even higher one. Yvon did not lower his head or sigh in despair. He just nodded silently and squared his shoulders. "Well then," he said firmly, "our path lies to Tsar Afron. Lead me, wise raven." The bird cawed in approval. "I see I was not mistaken in you, Tsarevich. Your spirit is strong." Yvon again climbed onto the broad back of his winged friend. The raven pushed off from the ground and soared into the evening sky, heading for the third kingdom, to where the golden bird languished in a golden cage in a magical garden. The first real test lay ahead. Thus, the chase for the mermaid led him to the horse, the chase for the horse to the bird, and he flew ever farther from his home, but ever closer to his true goal. When the moon rose high, the raven landed by the walls of Tsar Afron's castle. Everything around was plunged in a deep sleep.
"Look," the raven whispered. Yvon glanced over the fence and froze. In the middle of the garden, in a simple wooden cage, sat the golden bird. Its feathers shone so brightly that they illuminated the trees around, the paths, and the sleeping guards who dozed at the gates. "Go," the raven whispered. "The guards are asleep from its singing. Take the bird and leave. But remember this well, Yvon. Next to the wooden cage stands another, a golden one, adorned with gems. Do not dare to touch it. If you take the bird together with the golden cage, there will be trouble." Yvon nodded. "I swear, I will do exactly as you say." And the wise raven gave him one last piece of advice, simple as day and as complex as human greed, which was about to be tested. Ivan Tsarevich slipped silently into the garden, past the sleeping guards, past the fragrant flowers, straight to the shining marvel. He carefully opened the door of the wooden cage and took the golden bird in his palms. It was warm, like a living flame, and Ivan's heart fluttered with joy. He had already turned to leave, but then his gaze fell upon the empty golden cage that stood nearby. It shone in the moonlight, studded with rubies and emeralds, perfection itself. How can I carry such a marvel in my hands? The thought flashed through his mind. And is it fitting for such a wondrous bird to sit in a simple wooden cage? This one suits it so much better. The raven's words, clear and stern, suddenly faded in his memory, clouded by the gleam of gold. Ivan reached out his hand and touched the precious cage. In that moment, his kind heart lost the battle to his greedy eyes, and a single touch of the cold gold ruined their entire clever plan. The very instant Ivan's fingers touched the golden cage, the night exploded with a deafening ringing. Hundreds of tiny bells and strings, secretly tied to the cage, raised such a clamor that the entire kingdom awoke. Guards rushed in from all sides. Ivan was seized, his hands were bound, and he was dragged to the throne room. Tsar Afron, awakened in the middle of the night, was furious. "So this is the kind of thief you are," his voice boomed. "You dared to steal my treasure." But when he learned that the captive was a king's son, his anger gave way to cold calculation. "I do not want war with your father," the Tsar said. "Therefore, I offer you a deal. I will forgive you and give you the golden bird if you do a service for me. Bring me the golden horse from the warrior king." There was no choice. Ivan bowed his head and agreed. Thus, the hunter himself became the prey, and the freedom that was almost in his hands was exchanged for a new, even more difficult task. Ivan walked out of the castle gates with his head bowed. Each step was difficult for him, not from fatigue, but from shame. The raven was waiting for him by the wall, and its black eyes understood everything without words. "You did not listen to me, Tsarevich," it said quietly. "You gave in to greed, and I warned you." Ivan did not dare to raise his eyes. "Forgive me, wise raven, I failed you." "Ah, Yvon Tsarevich," the bird sighed. "Remember this well. In our quest, greed is the worst enemy. It blinds the eyes and clouds the mind." Ivan was silent, and the reproach in the raven's voice was more bitter to him than any punishment, for he realized he had failed not just an ally, but his only friend. "Well, never mind," the raven added more gently. "What's done is done. Climb on my back, we will fly for the horse." Ivan silently climbed onto the raven's back, and they rose into the sky once more. The same forests and mountains, the same rivers and valleys passed beneath them as before. But now, Ivan did not look around with the delight of a discoverer. He was silent and focused, and a stern determination burned in his eyes. The raven sensed the change and did not disturb him with conversation.
Soon, the familiar towers appeared. The kingdom of the warrior king, which they had flown past just recently. Now it was their destination. The raven descended and landed in the shadows by the walls of the royal stable, the very one that was famous throughout the world for its steeds. Somewhere in there, behind those walls, stood the golden horse. Yvon was flying back along his own tracks, but this was a different path. For now he carried on his shoulders not only hope, but also the weight of his first mistake. The raven looked around and whispered,
"Listen carefully, Tsarevich. Going to the stable. All the stable hands are fast asleep now. You will easily find the golden horse. It shines like the sun itself, and its light is visible from afar." The raven fell silent, and its gaze became stern. "Lead the horse out quietly by the halter, but remember, on the wall next to its stall hangs a golden bridle studded with diamonds. It is more valuable than the horse itself. Do not dare to touch it. If you take the bridle, there will be trouble again." Yvon straightened up and looked the raven straight in the eyes. "I swear to you, wise friend, I have learned my lesson. This time I will not fail." And the raven's words sounded like an echo of the past failure, like a test that fate was giving him a second time. Yvon slipped silently into the stable, and immediately he saw it. The golden horse stood in a far stall, and its mane and tail seemed to be woven from pure sunlight. Even in the darkness of night, it shone so brightly it took one's breath away. Yvon approached, stroked its warm neck, and quietly led the steed out of the stall. His heart was pounding. Remember the command. Remember the command. But then his gaze slid across the wall. There hung a bridle. Golden, studded with diamonds, it shimmered in the moonlight so much that it dazzled the eyes. It seemed as if the stars themselves had descended from the heavens and been woven into its straps. "No," Yvon thought, "it is not fitting for such a wondrous horse to be without such a bridle. This will not be a gift, but a disgrace. This time I will be careful." He reached out his hand and took the bridle from its hook. He once again stood before a choice between wise counsel and shining beauty. And his heart, not having learned from bitter experience, again chose glitter over caution. As soon as Yvon's fingers touched the bridle, the stable was shaken by a deafening crash. Heavy chains were tied to the bridle, and they came crashing down onto the stone floor with a clang. The horses neighed, the guards were alarmed. Yvon was seized before he could take a single step. The warrior king was more enraged than Tsar Afron. His eyes flashed lightning. "A thief! In my own home!" But upon learning that the captive was a king's son, he smirked coldly. "Well, there is one service for you that no one has yet been able to perform. Bring me the Golden Mermaid, daughter of the Sea King. Do this, and I will give you the horse, the bridle, and your freedom. If you do not, your head will adorn the gates of my castle." There was no choice. Yvon bowed his head. Thus his path, after making 2 huge and bitter circles, finally led him to the very goal with which it had all begun, the Golden Mermaid. Yvon walked out of the gates and trudged toward the raven, barely dragging his feet. There was neither strength nor hope left in him. "Forgive me, wise raven," he whispered. "Twice you warned me, and twice I did not listen. Twice I brought trouble upon myself. It seems it is not my fate to fulfill my father's command." But the raven did not reproach him. It only bowed its head and said calmly, "There now that you have left behind your pride and greed, we have finally come to where we should have started. Now you are ready." Yvon raised his eyes. "Climb on my back," the raven commanded. "Let us fly to the blue sea, to the palace of the Sea King." And Yvon understood. His real trials were not in stealing, but in learning to listen. Only now, after 2 bitter lessons, was he ready for the main test. The raven landed on the shore of the blue sea, and the waves parted before them, opening a path to the underwater palace. "Go," the raven said. "But this time, do not sneak. Go with an open heart." And Yvon went. He appeared before the throne of the Sea King and bowed low. There was no cunning or fear in him, only weariness and hope. "Great King," he began, "I have come to you not as a thief and not as a trickster. My father is dying, and only your daughter's singing can save him. Twice I tried to obtain a miracle by deceit, and twice I suffered disgrace. Now I ask you, I do not demand, but I implore you." The Sea King looked into his eyes for a long time, and he saw in them not greed, but a son's love for his father. "I see purity in your heart," he said at last. This time, Yvon had come not as a thief, but as a petitioner, and his honesty proved to be a more powerful key than any cunning. The Sea King clapped his hands, and the doors of the throne room swung open. She swam into the hall, the Golden Mermaid. Yvon froze, unable to look away. Her hair flowed like molten gold, enveloping her shoulders in a shining cloak. Her eyes were as blue as the sea's abyss, and just as bottomless. Her skin shimmered with a gentle mother of pearl, as if woven from the waves of dawn. But when she began to sing, her voice was like the whisper of the surf and the ringing of crystal bells. It penetrated to the very core of Yvon's heart and filled it with light. Their eyes met. She saw in him not a greedy treasure hunter, but a kind youth with a pure soul. And her heart fluttered in response. "So be it," said the Sea King. "I give you her hand." And Yvon understood. He had been searching for a cure for his father, but had found healing for his own soul. And the name of this healing was love. Yvon and the Golden Mermaid set off on their return journey. She walked on the land lightly, as if dancing, and her hand rested trustingly in his. At the border of the kingdom, the wise raven caught up with them. "You were honest with the honest," it said, "and that brought you victory. But with the cunning, one must speak their language. Enough being a simpleton.
Now we will act with their own weapons. When the towers of the warrior king appeared, the raven struck the ground, and before Yvon stood an exact copy of the Golden Mermaid, indistinguishable from the real one. "Hide her in the grove," the raven commanded in the mermaid's voice, "and lead me to the king."
The warrior king was indescribably delighted. He gave Yvon the golden horse and the precious bridle, not suspecting the deception. Yvon led the horse out, retrieved the real mermaid, and they galloped away. Thus, having learned from his mistakes, he for the first time paid for a treasure not with truth, but with a clever deception, and this deal was perfectly just. The Raven Mermaid spent only one day with the warrior king, and at dawn it turned back into a bird and flew out the window, leaving the king bewildered before an empty room. Soon it caught up with Yvon. "Well," the raven chuckled, "now it is my turn to become a horse." It struck the ground, and before them stood an exact double of the golden horse. Its mane shone with sunlight, its hooves clattered on the stones, and no expert could have told it apart from the real one. Yvon hid the mermaid and the true horse in the dense forest, and he himself led the steed to Tsar Afron. The Tsar was indescribably delighted. "Now that is a horse," he exclaimed. "No other ruler has one like it." As promised, he gave Yvon the golden bird along with the precious cage. And again the greedy Tsar was caught in a trap woven from his own desire to possess a miracle. The raven horse stood in the royal stable for only one night, and in the morning it turned back into a bird and flew away, leaving the stable hands in complete confusion. Soon it caught up with Yvon on a forest road and landed on his shoulder. "Well now, Tsarevich," it said, "now you possess everything." And indeed, it was a scene worthy of songs and legends. Yvon rode on the golden horse, whose mane flowed with sunlight. Next to him, with her arms around his waist, sat his beloved, the Golden Mermaid. And in his hand he held the precious cage, where the golden bird sang its magical song. He had completed all the tasks and turned each one to his advantage. He had set out on a journey for one miracle and was returning with 3. And each of them was a reward not only for courage, but also for the mistakes that had taught him wisdom. When the familiar hills of his native kingdom appeared ahead, the raven landed on a roadside oak. "Well, Ivan Tsarevich," it said, "my service is finished here. I have helped you as much as I could. From here on, you are on your own." Ivan dismounted and bowed low to the wise bird. "I thank you, faithful friend. Without you, I would have been lost. I will never forget your kindness." The raven bowed its head, and a shadow of anxiety flickered in its black eyes. "Listen to me one last time, Tsarevich. You have obtained great treasures, but remember, the most terrible danger awaits you not in foreign lands, but in your own home. Beware, especially of your brothers." With these words, it spread its mighty wings and soared into the sky. Thus, The wisdom that had guided him through all the trials left his shoulder, leaving a final, most bitter warning about the betrayal that can come from one's own blood. Joy filled Yvon's heart, his native land, familiar forests and meadows. Soon he would embrace his father and restore his health. In this joy, he completely forgot the wise raven's warning. The day was hot. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the long journey had exhausted the travelers. When a shady grove by an old, dry well appeared ahead, Yvon decided to rest. He tied the golden horse to a spreading oak. He placed the cage with the golden bird on the grass. He spread his cloak on the soft grass. The Golden Mermaid lay down beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. And the bird began to sing its magical song, quiet, lulling. Yvon's eyelids grew heavy. He closed his eyes, just for a minute, and fell asleep. Soundly, deeply, defenselessly. All his treasures lay beside him, open to the world. He fell into the sleep of a victor, the deepest and most defenseless sleep, not knowing that his brother's envy was not sleeping and was already on his trail. And at that very moment, two travelers walked into the clearing. They were Yvon's elder brothers. All this time they had been feasting in a roadside tavern, not thinking of their ailing father or the Golden Mermaid. But the gold ran out, the wine was drunk, and the innkeeper threw them out. Now they were trudging home with empty pockets and heavy heads, wondering how to explain their disgrace to their father. And suddenly they froze. In the clearing, under the old oak, slept their younger brother, that same simpleton Ivanushka. And next to him, the golden horse, shining like the sun, a cage with the golden bird, and a maiden of such beauty that it took one's breath away. Envy crept into their hearts like a black snake. Thus, their path of drunkenness and idleness accidentally crossed with his path of heroic deeds. And this meeting promised nothing but trouble. The brothers stood over the sleeping Yvon, and their eyes burned with a black fire. The golden horse, the golden bird, and this maiden, more beautiful than any princess in the world. All this had been obtained by their younger brother, the quiet one they had always laughed at. So this is what he's like, our Ivanushka the fool, the eldest hissed, his voice dripping with venom. He took everything for himself, and we are to return to our father with empty hands? Disgrace awaits us, and the crown awaits him? That will not happen, the middle one ground out through his teeth. They exchanged a look, and in that look there was nothing human left. If he wakes up, the eldest said slowly, he will tell the truth. Father will find out that we squandered the gold in a tavern. No, he must not wake up. Ever. The middle one nodded. Slowly, silently, they drew their swords from their sheaths, and the envy that had long slumbered in their souls awoke and demanded blood. Without hesitation, they decided to sacrifice their own brother to it.
but they did not even have the courage for murder. They were afraid of blood, afraid it would haunt them in their dreams. Stealthily, they approached their sleeping brother. Quickly, before he could wake up, they bound his hands and feet with a rope. Yvon opened his eyes, but it was too late. "Brothers, what are you doing?" They did not answer. Silently, they lifted him and dragged him to the old, dry well. "No, have mercy." They threw him into the darkness. A dull thud came from the bottom, far, very far below. The groan of a wounded brother rose from the depths, but they only smirked and rolled a heavy stone over the opening. Darkness swallowed Yvon. Thus they buried him alive in a stone tomb, hoping that along with him they would bury his luck and their own envy.
Having finished with their brother, the villains turned to the spoils. The eldest grabbed the reins of the golden horse. The middle one picked up the cage with the bird. And then they approached the mermaid. She was already awake. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and a silent horror stood in her eyes. "Listen to me, beautiful," the eldest hissed, leaning toward her. "You will tell our father the king that it was we who obtained you. We brought you from across the blue sea. And if you utter a single word of truth," the middle one added, "we will do to you what we did to your fiancé. Understand?" The mermaid trembled. Her voice, that magical voice, was stuck in her throat. She nodded silently. "That's a good girl," the eldest smirked. They threw chains of fear on her voice, forcing her to become a silent witness to their lies and an accomplice to their betrayal. Pleased, the brothers headed for the palace. The elder brothers rode into the palace with great pomp. Trumpets blared. The people rejoiced. They brought to their dying father's bedside the Golden Mermaid and the Golden Horse and the Golden Bird in its precious cage. The old king propped himself up on his pillows, and his eyes flashed with hope. "My sons, you have fulfilled my will." But his joy did not last long. The mermaid stood before him, as beautiful as the sea's dawn, but her lips were sealed. She did not sing. The golden horse stood dejectedly in its stall, unwilling to gallop. And the bird sat motionless in its cage and did not make a sound. All three miracles seemed dead, as if their souls had been taken from them. "Why are they silent?" the king whispered in confusion. The brothers brought the bodies of the treasures, but not their souls. And in the throne room reigned not the joy of healing, but the silence of a great deception. And the wise raven, at that hour, was already far away. But suddenly its heart clenched with a dark premonition. It turned around and flew back. It found a clearing by the old well. It saw the trampled grass, the signs of a struggle, and heard faint groans from beneath the ground. Its worst fears had come true. "Hold on, Tsarevich!" it shouted into the darkness. The raven rose into the sky and let out a loud, piercing cry. From all sides its subjects flew in, dozens of strong black ravens. they brought a strong rope in their beaks and lowered it into the well. Yvon, wounded and exhausted, clung to it with his last strength. The ravens, flapping their wings, all pulled together and lifted him out of the stone tomb. The wise raven washed his wounds with healing water and told him everything that was happening in the palace. Thus he who once saved a bird from a fox was himself saved by birds from the jaws of the earth. His kindness returned to him on dark, faithful wings. Yvon rose to his feet, and a fire of righteous anger burned in his eyes. "Fly, my wise friend," he said. "Fly to the palace." He climbed onto the raven's back, and it shot into the sky like an arrow. Meanwhile, in the throne room, the old king sat in sorrow. The mermaid was silent. The bird did not sing, and the hope for healing was fading with every hour. "Well," he said with a heavy sigh, "it seems my fate is decided. I declare as my heir." At that moment, the doors of the throne room burst open with a crash. On the threshold stood Yvon Tsarevich, alive, unharmed, with a burning gaze. On his shoulder sat a large black raven. The entire hall froze. The elder brothers turned as white as a sheet. Their legs gave way beneath them. Yvon entered not as a forgiven exile, but as a judge returned from the other world to announce his verdict. And his appearance was like a bolt of lightning. The very instant Yvon crossed the threshold, a miracle happened. The Golden Mermaid raised her eyes, saw him, and smiled. Her lips parted, and a song poured from her chest. The very same magical song that heals any ailment. In the royal stable, the golden horse neighed joyfully, striking its hoof on the stone floor. And the golden bird in the cage burst into such a sweet trill that all the courtiers fell into a deep sleep. Only 3 remained standing: Yvon, the mermaid, and the old king. The song washed over the king like living water. He felt strength returning to his body, and he understood everything without words. "Seize them," he ordered, pointing at his pale elder sons. The traitors were exiled from the kingdom in disgrace forever, and Yvon Tsarevich embraced his golden mermaid and became king, wise and just. Thus the treasures, which had been silent in the hands of traitors, found their voice to greet their true master, and their song became a hymn of love and a sentence for the liars.